Welcome to the lecture for Basics of Biblical Hebrew, Chapter 8, the Hebrew pronouns. Now in this chapter we're going to be covering a number of different types of pronouns in Hebrew. We're going to talk about personal pronouns, relative pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, and interrogative pronouns. Both Hebrew and English exhibit a number of different types of pronouns, and we're going to talk about each of those types in today's lecture. I want to begin with personal pronouns. Personal pronouns. In Hebrew, there are a set of independent personal pronouns that you will need to memorize. These are the pronouns that we have in English: I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. They're the pronouns that are used to refer to other nouns, normally people. If I'm referring to myself, I would say I. If I'm referring to another person, I might say you, or they, or them. These are personal pronouns, and they're used to refer to myself or other people in context. Let's look together at the screen and look at the Hebrew independent personal pronouns. The first thing that you'll notice is that the Hebrew personal pronouns are labeled independent personal pronouns. They're labeled as independent pronouns because these pronouns stand by themselves. That is, they are not prefixed or suffixed to other words. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about pronominal suffixes, or those pronouns that are attached to the end of words. For that reason, we're going to talk about these particular pronouns as independent, not prefixed or suffixed to other words. Secondly, you'll notice that these pronouns are divided into a number of different categories. There are singular pronouns referring to one individual or thing, and plural independent personal pronouns referring to more than one person or thing. They're also divided up into different genders. There's the masculine gender, the feminine gender, and we also want to talk about the common gender. Now, the common gender means I can refer to either a masculine or feminine item using this particular pronoun. For example, the English pronoun I, us, or we is first person and common. I can use those pronouns to refer to a male or a female. Hebrew has the same thing. They have common pronouns, a pronoun that can refer either to a masculine or a feminine item, and that pronoun is known as common. So two numbers, singular and plural, and three genders, masculine, feminine, and common, which is really masculine and feminine. Let's look at the slide together and we'll see that there are a number of different pronouns. We want to read these together as we go down the chart. We'll begin with the singular pronouns. For the first common singular, there are two different independent personal pronouns, ani and anoki. Ani, anoki. Both of these pronouns are translated as I. I. The spelling of each does not change the definition or the translation of the word. It's two different spelling options, ani or anoki. The translation is I. The second masculine singular form is pronounced ata. Ata, and it's translated as you. But the second feminine singular form is at, and it is also translated you, but it refers to feminine things, not masculine things. The third masculine singular form is who, and it's translated as either he or it. And the third feminine singular is he, and it's translated as she or it. Now I want to point out with the third feminine singular category that there are two spellings. The first spelling that you'll see on the right is the more common spelling, he. The second spelling that you see on the left is also translated as he, but it appears with a wow as the second root letter, not as a Hirik Yod as the first example has. The spelling on the left is a special spelling that occurs only in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So I've placed both of those spellings there for you, and you need to memorize both spellings. The first one on the right is more common. The second one on the left is restricted to appearances in the Pentateuch. Let's look at the plural forms together. The first common plural, anachnu, anachnu. That's the independent personal pronoun translated we. It's first common plural. Second masculine plural, atem. It's translated as you, but you masculine plural, or you all. The second feminine plural, atena, atena, translated as you, but it's feminine plural. The third masculine plural, has two possible forms, haim, hema, and the third feminine plural also has two forms, hain or haina. Notice that the difference in spelling between the first form and the second form is the addition of a comet's hay at the end of the word plus a doggish forte in the mim or the noon. These independent personal pronouns must be memorized as vocabulary items. They must be memorized as vocabulary items. You need to know that ani means I, that hu means he, that haim means they. You must memorize these forms. You don't necessarily have to memorize them as a paradigm in this chart, but you do need to memorize them as vocabulary items. Let's look together at your screen and learn a few things about the independent personal pronouns. Number one is something we've already covered, but it's important to reinforce. The independent personal pronoun is labeled independent because it stands alone. It is not prefixed or suffixed to another word. That's why they're independent. Number two, independent personal pronouns are subjective. Subjective, meaning they are used as the subject of a verb and never as the object of a verb. Let me put it this way. These are subjective pronouns. They are not objective or possessive pronouns ever. In the next chapter, we will learn about pronouns that are objective or possessive. The pronouns that are independent personal pronouns are only subjective. They will be either the subject of a verbless clause or the subject of a verbal clause. Number three, independent personal pronouns may also appear as the subject of a verbless clause. For this reason, they are sometimes just simply called the subject pronouns. The subject pronouns. So, number one, they're independent. Number two, they're always subjective, never objective. And number three, they appear as the subject of a verbless clause and can be called simply subject pronouns. Let's take a look on your screen at the third category, the use of independent personal pronouns as subject pronouns. Now, the examples on this page appear without verbs, and so it's this verbless clause category that we're going to look at. You'll see that in all of the examples listed on your screen, the pronouns, the independent personal pronouns, are highlighted in red. All of the other words that appear are either adjectives or nouns. There are no verbs. Let's look at the first example, ani Yahweh. Now, there are only two words here in Hebrew. The independent personal pronoun ani, meaning I, and the proper name, the covenant name of God, Yahweh, sometimes translated the Lord. In this particular case, the combination of the subject pronoun ani plus the proper name Yahweh, it creates a verbless clause. Ani Yahweh is not I Yahweh, but I am Yahweh. We add that am or form of the verb to be to create a verbless clause. That's how this particular independent personal pronoun can function apart from verbs. Let's look at our second example. Hu Navi Tzaddik. Translated, he is a righteous prophet. You'll recognize the independent personal pronoun hu, third masculine singular. It appears at the beginning of the sentence. It's followed by Navi, the noun, modified by Tzaddik, the adjective. That construction, Navi Tzaddik, is translated a righteous prophet. The pronoun at the front is a subject pronoun, an independent personal pronoun as a subject pronoun. And we translate it in this construction with a form of the verb to be. Not he a righteous prophet, but he is a righteous prophet. He is a righteous prophet. We must insert a form of the verb to be for it to make sense. Let's look at our fourth example on your screen. Achim anachnu. Achim anachnu. Here we have the independent personal pronoun, first common plural, anachnu, translated as we. Before the independent personal pronoun, you see the masculine plural noun achim, meaning brothers. Brothers. We translate this construction, we are brothers, with the form of the verb to be, are. Notice in this particular case, the noun comes first, the independent personal pronoun comes second. In Hebrew, word order is variable. Sometimes the noun comes first, sometimes the pronoun comes first. In English, when we're translating, we always like the pronoun first and the nouns second. So when you encounter a verbless clause with a subject pronoun like achim anachnu here, you'll want to reverse your word order in translation for it to make sense in English. Very good. Our next pronoun that we want to talk about is the Hebrew relative pronoun asher. The Hebrew relative pronoun asher. This pronoun is generally translated as who, that, or which. Let's look at our screens together. The relative pronoun asher. The form of this word does not change in order to indicate the gender or number of its antecedent. And that is good news. This is a frozen form. It does not inflect. It will always, always, always appear as asher. And when it functions as a relative pronoun, it will introduce a relative clause. And the relative pronoun that introduces a relative clause will modify normally another noun. And it will immediately follow the noun that it modifies. On your screen, you will see 4 examples of relative clauses that follow nouns. Let's look at our first example together. Ha'etz asher bathok hagon. The tree that is or was in the middle of the garden. The relative pronoun asher introduces the relative clause. The relative clause includes asher and continues. The relative clause in our first example is asher bathok hagon, which or that is in the garden. That relative clause functions in some sense like an adjective modifying the tree. The tree. Which tree? Oh, the tree that's in the middle of the garden. The relative pronoun introduces a relative clause, and the relative clause normally modifies a noun. That relative clause will come directly after the noun it modifies. Let's look at example number 2. Heharim asher tachat hashemayim. The mountains that are under the heavens. The noun heharim, the mountains, is modified by the relative clause asher tachat hashemayim. You can see the relative pronoun appears in red, and you'll notice in this particular example that the relative pronoun asher appears with the makef, that short little horizontal stroke that follows it in red. Sometimes the relative pronoun will appear with the makef. Whether it appears with the makef or without the makef does not impact the spelling of the relative pronoun. It's always asher. Let's look at the last example on your screen. Dawid asher baveth Yahweh. David, who is or was in the house of the Lord. Notice the relative pronoun asher introduces the relative clause asher baveth Yahweh, and that entire relative clause modifies David. David. David, which David? Well, David, the one who is in the house of Yahweh. It tells us where he is. So relative pronouns introduce relative clauses, and relative clauses modify nouns. They will come after the noun they modify. You can think of the relative clause having an adjectival function modifying a noun. So we've now covered independent personal pronouns and the relative pronoun asher. The next pronoun we want to talk about is the demonstrative pronoun, or the demonstrative pronouns in Hebrew. Now in English, the demonstrative pronouns are this, these, that, and those. This, these, that, and those. In Hebrew, they have a set of demonstratives that are translated like this, these, that, or those. And they come in a variety of forms, inflected like nouns and adjectives for gender and number. Let's look at these forms together on your screen. The singular category and the plural category. We'll begin with the singular. The masculine singular demonstrative is ze, and it's translated as this. The feminine singular demonstrative is zoth, and it's also translated as this. But you'll observe later that the feminine form is used with feminine nouns, and the masculine form is used with masculine nouns, and that's why you have 2 different genders. The masculine singular is who, and the feminine singular is he. Again, let's read through the singular forms together. Ze, zoth, who, and he. In the plural category, the masculine plural is eleh, and the feminine plural is eleh. Now you can think of these 2 forms as simply common. The demonstrative eleh can be either masculine or feminine. All right? That's the masculine plural is haim, hema, and the feminine plural is hain, hena. Let's read these forms together in the plural category. Eleh, eleh, haim, hema, hain, hena. Now there are a few things we need to know about these demonstratives. Let's look at our screen together. 3 notes for you. Number 1, demonstratives may be used either as adjectives, this man, those women, or as pronouns, this is the man, those are the women. So we're going to have to take some time and understand when is a demonstrative used like a pronoun and when is a demonstrative used like an adjective. But that's just a little bit later. Note number 2, the masculine and feminine singular forms who and he are identical to the third person masculine and feminine singular independent personal pronouns. That is to say, who and he can mean either that or he or she. We'll have to figure out from context when the form who is an independent personal pronoun or when who is a demonstrative. For now, it's simply good to know that the independent personal pronoun who and he are much more common than the demonstratives who and he. And finally, note number 3, something we've already covered, but I want to reinforce. The demonstrative ela, these, is both masculine and feminine plural. Now you'll remember that this designation is common, meaning it's not inflected for gender, or it can be used to refer to both genders, either masculine or feminine. We now need to turn our attention to the use of the demonstratives. How are they used as demonstrative adjectives and how are they used as demonstrative pronouns? We're going to begin with a demonstrative adjective. When the demonstrative is used like an adjective or demonstrative adjective, it will agree with the noun it modifies in gender and number and definiteness. Now that should sound familiar to you. When an adjective modifies a noun in the attributive way, it will also agree in gender, number, and definiteness. So when we have a demonstrative functioning like an adjective and modifying a noun, it's got to agree with that noun in those same 3 categories, gender, number, and definiteness. Let's look together at the screen for some examples. In the first example, you'll see ha'ish hazeh. Ha'ish hazeh, this man. Notice that the noun is masculine and singular and definite, and so the demonstrative is masculine and singular and definite, this man. You'll also notice that the demonstrative follows the noun in each case. On your screen, all the demonstratives are highlighted in red, and you'll see that in every case, the demonstrative follows the noun. You'll also notice that a literal translation of these constructions is awkward in English. For example, ha'ish hazeh, the first example, to the beginner might be translated the man, the this. But in English, we don't have an expression that would make sense, the man, the this. We simply say this man. The reason you have the definite articles on both form is because you want them to agree in gender and number and definiteness. And so when they agree in those categories, you translate them as the simple demonstrative followed by the noun. Let's look at the second example. Ha'isha hazoth. You'll notice that the noun is feminine and singular and definite, and it's followed by the demonstrative adjective, which is also feminine and singular and definite. Because they agree in gender, number, and definiteness, you translate the demonstrative as an adjective, this woman. And it works the same way throughout the rest of examples on your screen, but we'll move on. The next usage we want to talk about is the demonstrative as a pronoun. The demonstrative as a pronoun. In this usage, you'll notice on your screen that all the demonstratives appear before the noun and not after the noun. You'll also notice that the demonstrative agrees with the noun to which it is related in gender and number, but not definiteness. This is very similar to the predicative use of adjectives. They will agree in gender and number, but not definiteness. And these are how demonstrative pronouns work with the nouns to which they are related. So let's look at our first example. Zeh ha'ish. Zeh ha'ish. This is the man. You'll notice that the demonstrative appears first and it's masculine and singular. The noun appears second and it's masculine and singular and definite. The demonstrative does not have the article. The noun has the article. So they agree in gender and number, but not definiteness. Because they agree in gender and number, but not definiteness, this is indicative or diagnostic of the demonstrative used as a pronoun, and therefore you translate this as a verbless clause once again with the form of the verb to be. Not this the man, but this is the man, or this was the man. Let's look at the second example. Zoth ha'isha. Zoth ha'isha. This was the woman. Again, the demonstrative appears first, not second. It's feminine singular. The noun follows. It's also feminine singular, but definite. They agree in gender and number, but not definiteness. This identifies the demonstrative as a pronoun, and we translate it not this the woman, but this is or was the woman. When the demonstrative pronoun appears, you translate it with the form of the verb to be. What happens then when a noun is modified both by an adjective and a demonstrative? In this case, all three together must agree in gender and number and definiteness. Let's look at our screens at the first example. Ha'ish hatov hazeh. Ha'ish hatov hazeh. This construction is translated, this good man. The noun ish is masculine, singular, and definite. The adjective tov is masculine, singular, and definite. The demonstrative zeh is masculine, singular, and definite. Because each of them exist as masculine, singular, definite forms, they all agree in gender and number and definiteness. So you translate them all attributively, this good man. Now to the beginner, you may be tempted to translate it this way, the man, the good, the this. You'll notice, however, that we don't have an English expression that makes sense of that particular translation. When we're trying to say this good man, we don't say the man, the good, the this. But that's how they say it in Hebrew. And so we'll need to work with the Hebrew and translate all that material into the English. So we're not just translating the words, we're translating also the grammar and the syntax. We just can't do the one for one, the man, the good, the this. It would make no sense. We must translate both the words and the syntax. And in this particular case, we have a noun modified both by an adjective and a demonstrative, this good man. All of the other examples play out this very same reality. Let's quickly look at the second example. Ha'isha, hatova, hazoth. Again, you've got a series of a noun, an adjective, and a demonstrative. They're all feminine and singular and definite. So you translate them attributively, this good woman. Not the woman, the good, the this, but this good woman. You'll notice, for example, on your screen that the definite article appears 3 times in the construction. Ha'ish, hatov, hazoth. But the definite article is never rendered in the translation. The article there just connects them in definiteness for the translation as attributives. This good woman. So there are 3 definite articles, but they never appear in your translation. Good. Let's look at one more use of the demonstrative so we have everything set perfectly clear. What happens when a demonstrative pronoun is used with another noun modified by an adjective? Let's look at our screens together. When a noun is modified by both an attributive adjective and a demonstrative pronoun, something like this is the good book, the demonstrative pronoun will appear first without the definite article, and the noun will follow. The attributive adjective will also be last, and it will agree with the noun it modifies in gender, number, and definiteness. Now this is a little bit of a tricky scenario. What you have here is a demonstrative that's functioning not as an adjective but as a pronoun. Now when a demonstrative functions as a pronoun, as the subject of a verbless clause, it will always be first, and it will never have the definite article. So as you can see in the 4 examples on your screen, the demonstrative appears in red, it's first in its clause, and none of those forms appear with the definite article. It's then followed in each instance by a noun and an adjective that agrees in gender, number, and definiteness. So in our first example, Zeh ha'ish hatov, this is the good man, the demonstrative agrees with the noun and the adjective in gender and number, but not definiteness. The demonstrative is masculine singular but indefinite. The noun and the adjective are masculine singular but definite. So they agree in gender and number but not definiteness. This creates that demonstrative pronoun or predicative type of relationship where you translate the construction with the form of the verb to be. This is the good man, not this the man the good. This the man the good may be just a literal rendering of the words in their context, but in English we don't have that type of expression. What we have to do in this case is translate both the words and the syntax into English. Not this, the man, the good, but this is the good man. So this is a very important case in where you'll have to translate two things, not just the words, one, but also two, the syntax. All right, we've covered now independent personal pronouns, the relative pronoun, and demonstratives, which can be either pronouns or adjectives. Now we're going to cover interrogative pronouns. And interrogative pronouns are used to ask questions. Who, what, when, where, why, how. These are interrogatives. Let's look together at our screens at two of the more common interrogative pronouns. Me, meaning who, and ma, meaning what. Me and ma. Now these interrogatives are used to introduce questions, and they may be spelled either with or without the makef. There are a couple of different spelling options, but we'll cover those later. All right? Let's look at some examples. I want to begin with the bottom three examples on this page. In each instance, in the bottom three examples, you see the interrogative pronoun me, which asks the question, who? In each case, the interrogative begins the interrogative clause. In the first example with me eta, we are asking the question, who are you? You'll notice that a form of the verb to be does not appear in this construction in Hebrew. Simply who plus eta, you. But when we translate it, we have to add a form of the verb to be. In this case, are. Who are you? You'll probably be picking up the fact now that Hebrew loves the verbless clause. In English, we don't use the verbless clause. In Hebrew, you can create verbless clauses with adjectives and with pronouns. And so we need to begin to become familiar with that, and you'll see more and more of them as we progress through the lecture. We're going to have three verbless clauses with me on this slide. So let's look again at our screen at the second example. Mi ha'ish hazeh. Mi ha'ish hazeh. Who is this man? This is the interrogative me, followed by the noun ish, masculine singular definite, followed by the demonstrative adjective hazeh. Not who, the man, the this. That's just a translation of the words. We've got to translate the syntax also. Who is this man? So that's the interrogative me. It's always spelled with the mem consonant and hirik yod. Let's look together again at your screen. Now we're going to look at the interrogative ma, which is translated as what. The interrogative ma translated what. Those are included in the first three examples on your screen. First, you'll notice that the interrogative ma has three different spelling options. There's ma with the pathic, there's meh with the segol, and there's ma with the comets. Pathic hey, segol hey, comets hey. Now there are reasons for these different spelling options. In fact, the spelling of the interrogative ma works very much like the definite article. If you look at the first example, you'll see the interrogative ma shmo. What you'll notice is that in the first letter of the construction shmo, there's a dagesh forte in the shin. That's just like the dagesh forte that's associated with the definite article. In the second two examples, me asitha, you'll notice that the first letter to which the word me is joined is a guttural. The guttural cannot take the dagesh forte, and in this case it gets the irregular segol vowel. Have you seen the irregular segol vowel? Yes, with the definite article. Let's look more closely at the third instance here. Ma hachalom hazeh. In this case, the interrogative ma is spelled with a comets because the hey of hachalom rejects the dagesh forte and causes the pathic to lengthen to comets. What is the dream? Now you don't really need to worry about why these words are spelled that way. It's probably easier at this point to simply understand that the interrogative ma can be spelled either pathic hey, segol hey, or comets hey. There are three spelling options. Okay? Again, with our third example in the ma category, ma hachalom hazeh, you'll notice that there's no verb. It's simply what, the dream, the this. But we're going to translate it with a form of the verb to be. What is this dream? The interrogative ma is followed by the noun chalom, meaning dream, with the definite article, which is followed by the demonstrative adjective. It agrees with the noun in gender, number, and definiteness. Now really this is very simple. You simply must memorize ma and me as vocabulary words, meaning who or what, and please take note of the fact that the interrogative ma has 3 different spelling options. Now we're done with our basic discussion of pronouns in this chapter. We've covered independent personal pronouns or subject pronouns. We've covered the relative pronoun, which introduces a relative clause and modifies a noun. We've talked about the demonstratives, which can be either demonstrative pronouns or demonstrative adjectives. And then we've talked about a couple of demonstrative pronouns, ma meaning what and me meaning who. But before we move on, we want to talk about one more item, and that's the interrogative particle. Now this isn't an interrogative pronoun like ma or me. It's called an interrogative particle. The reason it's called an interrogative particle, not a pronoun, is because it doesn't exist as its own word. It's simply something that's prefixed to another word. Let's look together at your screen. The interrogative particle is spelled hey plus hatef pathic. Hey plus hatef pathic. The interrogative particle will be prefixed to the first word of the sentence, and it will convert that sentence from a statement into a question. Again, the interrogative particle, ha plus hatef pathic, will be prefixed to the first word of a sentence, and it will convert that sentence from a statement into a question. Let's look at an example. In the first line, we see a statement, Shalach hamelech eth hanavi. Shalach hamelech eth hanavi. The king sent the prophet. That is a statement. The statement is the king sent the prophet. In the second example, you will notice one addition to the sentence. At the very beginning, highlighted in red, is the interrogative particle, ha. It's prefixed to the first word in the clause. Now in this case, the first word is a verb, and we haven't had verbs, so don't worry. This particular verb means sent. And so who sent? The king sent. Notice, however, the translation is not the king sent the prophet, that's the statement. When you prefix the interrogative particle, hashalach, you translate the statement as a question. Did the king send the prophet? So the interrogative particle, ha, takes a statement and converts it into a question. A couple of items to note about the spelling of the interrogative particle. Here you go. Look together with me on your screen. Number 1, before most consonants, the interrogative is spelled hey plus pathic, and that would be the form that you would memorize as your vocabulary item. However, before gutturals or any consonant with a schwa, it's going to be spelled as hey with a regular pathic, not the hatef pathic. And finally, number 3, before gutturals with a comets, the interrogative particle is going to be spelled with segol, and we learned that as the irregular segol in the chapter on the definite article. All right? Now with the interrogative particle, you'll want to be sure that you don't confuse it with the definite article. The interrogative particle and the definite article both begin with the consonant hey. Both begin with a consonant hey, and so you don't want to confuse them when you see one or the other prefixed to a word. There are 3 clues that I can give you to help out with distinguishing between the definite article and the interrogative particle. Let's look on your screen at those 3 clues. Number 1, the hatef pathic of the interrogative particle is not the spelling of the definite article. They're different. How are they different? Number 2, the interrogative particle does not appear with the dogish forte. The definite article is spelled with a dogish forte. So the absence or presence of that dogish forte will be a very helpful distinguishing feature. But perhaps more helpful, or most helpful, is number 3. The interrogative particle is usually prefixed to a verbal form at the beginning of a sentence. And the definite article does not get prefixed to verbs. So if you see a hey prefixed to a verb for now, you're going to think of it as an interrogative particle. If you see a hey prefixed to a noun, you're going to think of it as the definite article. The 2 spellings are distinct. Now I will tell you this, in terms of relative distribution, the interrogative particle is rare when you compare it to the definite article. The definite article occurs everywhere in almost every verse of the Hebrew Bible. The interrogative particle is much, 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 much less common. So when in doubt, think definite article. So now we're done. We've concluded our discussion of both pronouns in Hebrew and the interrogative particle. We'll see you in the next chapter.